This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.
Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, among those walking the downtown streets this week have been people carrying M4 Carbine rifles. That actually proves to be an assuring development as National Guard troops and local police provide a super presence for the weekend ahead. Adding to the vigilance are a new top special agent for the local FBI at a time when the Bureau is being cut back nationwide, and a newly appointed anti-terror advisor. We will look at these stories as well as Mayor Cantrell erasing a deal with the Orleans School Board, plus an update on charter schools and what makes our dome such a super facility. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Marta, Jewson, staff writer, The Lens, and John Simerman, staff writer, the Times-Picayune and the New Orleans Advocate. And we're going to stay with John, because this is the weekend, the big Super Bowl weekend, and really intense security. And national security is also a concern, and there are questions about the FBI even here locally.
Yes, well, there's lots going on, a lot of moving parts. Right now in the French Quarter, it's a whole lot of security, like probably we have not seen here since, soon after Hurricane Katrina. I mean, we have Louisiana National Guard in numbers, state police in numbers downtown, federal Homeland Security agents with bomb-sniffing dogs, and they're riding around in these sort of desert warfare kind of Polaris vehicles. It looks like off-road vehicles, and there's gates everywhere. Don't go driving down there if you don't have to, but it's an interesting sight to see all of this security here. I think it's a combination of Super Bowl, which is sort of an elevated security level that brings in these federal resources, but also obviously in the aftermath of the January 1st attack,
right?
With the truck barreling down the street and killing 14 people and injuring and wounding dozens more, and really changing kind of the future maybe of how we secure at least Bourbon Street in that area.
Right. And we're going to be getting more into that about security measures, but we heard that here locally the special agent in charge has been reassigned, and so we have now an interim one.
We do, and it's I believe Stephen Cyrus is his name. He's from Kansas City. He's the special agent in charge there, and so this looks like a very temporary arrangement. Lionel Myrtle was the special agent in charge. Maybe he still is for New Orleans. He has been reassigned to Washington. There were kind of mixed messages from the FBI this week and last.
With the word former and not being included in one press release and not the other.
That's right. So they kind of had to figure out their message on was he or was he not still special agent in charge? Was he reassigned? And it's still a question. There's been talk of a big purge in the Justice Department, and FBI agents who were involved in the January 6th investigations being targeted, and there are real questions about kind of where that stands. Reuters reported that New Orleans was among 5 cities where the FBI senior leaders were going to be terminated or fired. Mr. Myrtle hasn't been terminated or fired, but we don't know his sort of real status at this point.
After the incident in January 1st, the acting agent in charge, the agent in charge was apparently out of the country.
That's Mr.
So
Myrtle. Acting
did the first press conferences, and we got a mixed message then.
Alethea Duncan, who was the assistant special agent in charge here, also, according to a report last month, has been reassigned. And she is the person who stood up and said initially on that, hours after, that it was not a terrorist act. The FBI will soon reverse that view, and she didn't really appear much anymore after that, in a public-facing way.
So we don't really know if these shifts now that have occurred with the upper leadership there at our local FBI agency. Was that related to the mistakes made for the?
We don't. Mr.
January?
Murthel again was in Europe, and there was no reporting to think that he had gone AWOL or anything. He got back within days, and he was on January 5th giving a briefing, the latest FBI briefing on what they knew at that point. So it appears maybe it has more to do with bigger factors.
Just what's going on with the FBI in general. But we do have an acting special agent in charge now.
We
though.
do. We do. And that's Mr. Cyrus, who showed up on Monday saying, I am that person.
Okay.
I've always found something very assuring about the FBI presence when something bad happens, and then you see the FBI there. I think, we know these guys. They know what they're doing. I mean,
well, as a reporter, you call them up, and usually they say no comment. They don't comment on a lot. So when you hear them talking about, trying to get out there, and their message is not very clear, that it's kind of surprising.
Well, certainly, we do rely upon groups like the FBI keeping us safe after having experienced what happened on January 1st and now hosting this huge event, this big international event in this city. I mean, really intense for this, this past week and going into this weekend. And you were just describing some of the security measures in the French Quarter, but there are more around the Superdome. I mean, this is really an expanded, really high alert security effort here. We also have a special security advisor now that the city of New Orleans has brought in. So why don't you tell us about him?
William Bratton, who was the former police chief in New York City twice and in Los Angeles, the former police chief there too. It's all dating back to the 90s when he first was a New York City police chief. I interviewed him. I sat down with him for about a half an hour. He's coming in here he's kind of wearing two hats. He has a client in Verizon. He's a security consultant now, and the city, the New Orleans Police and Justice Foundation has hired him to advise the city on anti-terror tactics. He's coming down here, he's looking, he says, at these Super Bowl preps, what's going on in the French Quarter now, what I described earlier. How much of that works going forward? How much of that works for Mardi Gras going forward, and just for generally Bourbon Street to prevent what happened on January 1st.
when you talked to him, did he say anything about his experiences in New York and what he learned from New York that could be applied here? Or?
Certainly, and he said, look, he's got experts on his team that are like the Bollards experts in New York, the ones who have put everything around Times Square and the ones who deal with New Year's and the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, although he did say that he's not used to 2 weeks straight of parades, and he didn't know quite that is what he's sort of involved in trying to figure out how to secure, because that's really the issue. Like, how do you bring, there's a threat level that's now SEER 1 that's being applied not only to the Super Bowl, but that same level to Mardi Gras. How do you do that? How do you, it's one thing for the NFL and everybody, the feds, to get around the Superdome, and even in the French Quarter, to kind of lock that down, but you're talking about what? How many miles of parade route is that?
And more than one day. He didn't realize that Mardi Gras was more than just that one day.
So he's here for that, and his team is here for that as well, and they're going to look at Mardi Gras, because they're not in charge of Mardi Gras security on this go-around. The feds are now, really. Homeland Security, the city still, has tons of say over what happens.
So is he just here short-term, or is he here?
He's here for this week, and then he's going to issue a report in a couple months after Mardi Gras, he says, and one of them is going to be an after-action report on the NOPD response to the terrorist attack. Chief Ann Kirkpatrick has asked him to do that, he says. And he's looking at the Super Bowl and Mardi Gras to figure out what works going forward for the French Quarter with businesses. Businesses don't want to shut down Bourbon Street.
Right.
There's no back entrance to Bourbon Street for some of these businesses. The trucks and things like that have to get in. And so he was talking about, it's a little like Times Square in terms of you've got to set up a permanent barriers, but you also have to have movable things. They can expand this security zone for big events and things like that.
Well, this has happened before that experts out of New York were hired. What was the guy's name? Was Maples? Or something?
Fausto, oh, well, yeah, you
Bratton
can go
was
back
too,
to
then.
Jack Maple and John Linder from the Pennington era of the Mark Morial administration when crime and murder was at its worst, over 400 murders in 1994.
And Bratton worked with them a little bit as well.
Bratton
right?
worked with them. He mentioned that when we spoke, that we kind of
Right.
stole those guys. And then Linder came back in 2022 when the foundation again hired him to look when our murders were spiking and violent crime was spiking. And he brought in Fausto Pichardo, a consultant. Again, we didn't know much about that deal, how much, who was paying for it, how much, and we don't know much about Bratton's deal either.
So brought in by the Police and Justice Foundation again. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about security in the quarter, just to kind of get it clear for folks who are maybe going to attempt to venture down there
Good
among
luck,
the
good
crowds.
luck.
Are you able to drive at all anywhere in the quarter?
You are. Today you were. I mean, it's sort of every day is ratcheted up kind of the security and the places you can't go. So, but I was down there at noon on Friday and saw there were, you know, a lot of livery trucks, a lot of people trying to get people around and not succeeding in vehicles because there are all these gates, National Guard guarding these gates, and I think you really got to want to be in there. I rode my bike around. People walking around can get around pretty well. Although some of these barriers on Bourbon Street, we're going to see when these crowds come in how well they're going to be able to get through there because every single intersection on Bourbon Street is really blocked off except for, you know, you kind of got to go around these big metal barriers to get through. How's that going to work when everybody's down there? We'll see.
So if you want to go down there, it's probably best to think about not driving.
I wouldn't
down
be
there,
driving.
Basically.
I mean, I don't, you know, the parking, I've heard some horror stories about parking rates down there too. So
Yeah, I'm sure it's pretty high.
But several people in authority have said, I heard the police chief say the other day, I think the mayor has said that New Orleans is going to be the safest place in the nation. I mean, from what you see, I mean, do you feel that?
yeah, I mean,
Nailed
we were getting
down?
press releases about NORAD flying fighter, you know, doing all their kind of surveillance from the skies, and you know, when you hear about all the cameras they have and the, you know, all of the kind of communications that they're doing, it sounds like they could have stopped, you know, with this level of security, what happened on the first.
So in that really that perimeter from Royal over to Dauphine and down Bourbon, there are going to be bag checks, et cetera. You can't carry in backpacks.
They say you can't carry in coolers. They
Right.
say backpacks. Nobody up to now has had a problem getting backpacks or been stopped with backpacks that we've, you know, had my colleagues go in there. But yes, you're not supposed to carry something bigger than a purse. You're not supposed to carry coolers in there. You can carry weapons, though. We have concealed, permitless concealed carry in the state as of August. You can open carry.
which means you could see the weapon that you're
You
carrying,
can't be
including
drunk. You
rifles.
can't be high. You can't, you know,
Including
have a
rifles,
felony record. But you know, the question is, what is their reasonable suspicion to stop you? You know, we'll see how that plays out.
Somebody could carry a rifle.
I remember
also?
the 2002 Super Bowl, which was the first big event in the nation after September 11th. It happened to be the Super Bowl here. And people were scared. I mean, they were really concerned because they didn't know what September 11th meant in terms of it. But for those few days ahead, there were jets all day long flying around at different levels and different circles. And those jets, when they make their noise, if you're on the wrong side, they're scary, okay? I mean,
Yeah.
they'll frighten people away, you know?
Okay.
Some of those zones, like the no drone zones, are going to apply to Mardi Gras up and down the road.
All right, John. A lot of information there. Thanks a lot. All right, Marta, let's bring you on in this conversation now, but we're going to be talking about Orleans Parish schools. And right now, schools are facing a real deficit because of what they're describing as an accounting issue. And the city had arranged to help them, made a deal with it, but now Cantrell is saying, never mind. Can you explain, just sort of give us the background on that whole
Yeah, so we're going to go back to October when the district first announced that they were looking at a $36 million deficit in the school system, and they're saying that that was due to a forecasting error. Now, what makes it interesting in New Orleans is, you know, we're a majority charter school district, so the Orleans Parish School Board collects tax money on behalf of the charters who then receive that money. And one layer on top of that is that the city collects the tax money before it sends it to the school system. So where we got to was right after that announcement was made and the chief financial officer in the district resigned and the superintendent later announced her resignation. Then we had a deal struck between the Orleans Parish School Board and the city of New Orleans. And this is based on a lawsuit that had been existing for 6 years. So it was, of good interest to both parties to settle this lawsuit. Very convenient timing for the city, who was potentially going to get out of it with a $20 million settlement on what could be $100 million that they had skimmed off of schools' tax money for the last however many years.
And so now with this accounting difference also that the school system was facing was a deficit of what, 35 million, maybe up to $50 million. And so how much was the city going to come up with? Was it the 20 mil that?
Yeah, so the city agreed on 20 million. They were supposed to pay 10 million by the end of the year, which John's colleague reported they did not pay, and then another 10. On top of that was 70 million guaranteed over 10 years for education
Now
programs.
the mayor says, no, we're not going to do that, which of course has the council furious. Why is the mayor saying, no, the city can't do this?
The mayor's kind of saying it for two reasons. One, she's saying that she wasn't aware of it. That seems to be a hard argument for the council to accept because she did sign a budget ordinance that's approved specifically a $10 million settlement and, approved the city's budget in effect. The other thing she brought into that argument was that she's saying there have been incidents across the city that are causing more revenue to go out the door and to maintain essential services that they can't afford such a settlement.
So what's council saying they're going to do about this?
Council is taking a hard line. They said that she agreed to this, that she signed the budget ordinance, and that the schools really need the money. That's another thing, is that Cantrell's CAO was out there touting the agreement. So it's kind of hard to argue she didn't know what was happening.
Yeah, because there was a big press conference held, in November or something?
Right below her office. She would have been able to see it from her office.
So how is this now impacting the schools? The schools don't know how much money they're really going to have.
Right. So in October, school leaders were preparing to have $500 less per student that they had budgeted. Now they're thinking maybe $1,000 less per student, which is going to be $500,000 for a 500-student school, which is a huge chunk. To date, the district has not reduced its monthly payments that the schools get, but we're coming up to where they're going to have to do that, and it's looking like at this point that's going to affect summer school, summer programming, extracurriculars, and it could lead to staff layoffs, which everyone's hoping to hold off on.
So what's the word from the school board, particularly since the mayor now has said, no, we can't do this deal?
So the school board is trying to move forward with council. Both parties are interested in the settlement and getting that money over to kids. The council says if there is, JP Morrell said, a secret budget crisis, we're going to have to look at everything. How much paper is your department buying if you now say you can't afford this settlement?
Yeah, beyond just what the monies for the school system are.
Right.
Okay, all righty. Thanks a lot, Marta. All right, E, let's go on over to you, because we have the Louisiana Superdome that's been there since the mid-'70s, and it's one of the few structures, or maybe the only one from that time, dating from that time.
Well, it was certainly one thing that Louisiana did right. We always laugh at ourselves in terms of the politics and the history in this. But it was very impressive what Louisiana did. It was Houston that started the whole thing when they built the Astrodome in the 1960s. Baseball was going to give out 2 more franchises, and the people in Houston wanted one. And people said, well, it's crazy to have a baseball franchise in Houston when it's so hot during the summer. So this rich guy, Judge Hoffman, says, well, we're going to just build a stadium, put a roof over it and air conditioning, that's all, And so Houston did it first, and that became the inspiration. They call it the 8th wonder of the world, the Astrodome. And by today's presence, it's not much. You can still pass by it. There's some remains left of it. There's a new stadium that's next to the Astrodome, and the Astrodome looks like a thimble compared to it. But it was the first thing, and inspired other people, including a guy named Dave Dixon in New Orleans, who really became fired up on this and really wanted New Orleans to get a franchise. But the NFL really wasn't interested unless you promised a dome stadium. So they went to the governor and John McKithen. He heard what they said. We're going to build it better than Houston. A lot of this has to do with being better than Houston, all right? Which in most cases isn't hard to do. But in this case, I know. It took some real...
Houston has been nice to us.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. Salesmanship. And ultimately, the state approved it, and it got a lot of criticism. But the voters, they had to approve an amendment to the Constitution creating a dome stadium district, which provides for financing. They did it, and it took about a 10-year process, a lot of opposition. The original estimate was like $43 million, and they came out like $180 million, and so it's well short of the original estimate. But they built a good stadium. A New Orleans firm, Curtis and Davis, designed it and built it. It's a handsome stadium, from the outside. several dome stadiums were built around the country in Minneapolis, the Hubert Humphrey Dome and various domes. Most of them are gone since then. I mean, there's a bunch of domes that came and went since then, but the Superdome is going to be there forever. I mean, it's got a handsome exterior, and as somebody points out, there's been a lot of modifications to it, but it's all interior modifications, that the outside is still strong and what it's been. What I think is absolutely brilliant, I don't know if they saw it, but the dome was paid for rather quickly. And so they had these dome stadium bonds, and with the dome stadium bonds, they were able to finance building of the arena, what is now known as Zephyr Stadium, even though there's no Zephyrs, and the Ilario Center. But then not only that, but the arena was built fairly cheaply, especially for an NBA caliber arena, because there was no land costs, like they had the Dome Stadium. There was no need to build a garage because they had the Dome Stadium's garage. There was no need to build a new air conditioning system. And so much was already in place that it made the arena fairly expensive. And then, but people said, but the NBA is going to never come here. So once the NBA saw that, they were here. And so it was really the dome that inspired New Orleans getting that arena and getting an NBA franchise.
And it's brought the Super Bowls to us also. I mean, because the location is just, just incredible there, right in the center
usually
of
these
town.
other stadiums are built out. Right. And so it's very rare to have, and it's really brilliant to have a downtown location. One you can be in a downtown hotel and walk to. It's very rare, and it's very impressive. And so there have been a lot of big events that have been staged there. It is people who follow football saying that it is by far the people inside the NFL their favorite destination for a Super Bowl. If the other cities didn't mind, you could have the Super Bowl here, here every year. But it's a good location, it's a good facility, and it's a fun town.
Yep, and so the Dome will be rocking this Sunday, but it's rocking a whole lot over the course of the year, too, because it hosts so many different events, our Superdome. It's the Caesars Superdome now, too, we should say. Yeah. And quite an iconic building now. Definitely. And 50 years old, this 50th anniversary.
But I would say it's a tribute about one thing Louisiana really did right. Okay.
Absolutely, it really
and John McKitton was the governor, and he was from North Louisiana. And he deserves a lot of credit because he was really behind it.
You got it for us, yeah. All right. Thanks a lot, E. And Marta, let's wrap up with you because we, talked about schools. Well, Orleans Parish, it's almost all charter schools now. I mean, it's one direct-run school. Right. So how has this charter experiment been working for us?
So it's an interesting question, as always. We have seen, gains over the years. And actually, most recently, Louisiana showed some of the most growth across the country. But, that's with growth slowing down in other states. So comparatively, I think we're always kind of catching up. And I think the really hard thing for students here is that in a decentralized school system, that's all charters now except for one, is that even if students are able to choose their choice in this choice marketplace system, there's no guarantees that their school is going to stay open. Because the way schools work here is they run on 5, 7, 10-year contracts, and then when their contract's up for renewal, they'll be closed if they have an F or a D, generally speaking.
So that includes the criteria. They've got to, of course, match, outcomes there. They have certain outcomes have to be met, but it's also how they're running the school, the organization of the school, the management of the school within budget, et cetera.
Right, so it's academic, operational, and financial. And then we did see this year, Dolores T. Arthur School had to close mid-year because they didn't run their finances right. And that's a really hard thing to see in the city when you've made promises that kids can choose the programs that they want, parents can choose the schools that they want. Dolores T. Arthur was a unique campus, all male, and with a heavy focus on debate that kids loved.
Right, and students, like you said, loved it. They were attending that school, and then there it is no more. Right there in the middle of the year, right?
Right, and so you're scattering seniors to a new school for 3 months to graduate. I think a lot needs to be not just to look at school performance scores, but to look at kids who we've shuffled around from school to school. One of the seniors told me that he had been at Lanyap Academies, which closed in 2014 when he was a kindergartner. So a lot of repeated closures for kids to go through. And so,
the Orleans School Board has to approve these charters, right, for the Orleans system. There are statewide charters too, right? Like the New Orleans Military and Maritime Academy, right? And
yep,
NOCA?
And Lycée Francais and NOCA. NOCA's under a special board, but many others are approved by the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education.
Let's see. So that means that students across the state of Louisiana would be eligible to attend these schools.
Yes.
Unlike the Orleans charters are just really those are for Orleans residents only, right?
Correct.
For the charters. So, I mean, this is a system that's going to continue even though some schools don't have their charters renewed, but does it look like the system is going to maybe have some more direct run schools?
You know, I think that was a very likely scenario under Superintendent Avis Williams, who, you know, kind of during a botched closure, I'll call it, last school year, did step in and decide to run Lafayette Academy directly this year. And I think it could have trended in that direction, but now with her departure amid the financial crisis, it's really unclear what the new superintendent's charge might be in regards to direct schools. But there are families that want to choose direct schools.
Right.
What's the politics look like? Didn't they just fairly recently have some elections and a couple of seats were filled? And
They did, so they have kind of
anti-charter people and pro-charter people, and who's winning?
Well, so there's a big reform presence on the board. I think it's kind of settled down a little bit now, and they did elect one new board member who comes from much stronger
Is
union
reform
background.
pro-charter or anti-charter?
Sorry, what?
Okay.
And so it will be interesting to see how that all plays out. Another big issue for the school system right now is we're continuing to see enrollment decline, and that's something that's happening across the country. And when you're in a charter system, schools are operating on contracts. They get closed when they have a poor grade. They don't get closed because of low enrollment, because that's not how the system was designed to handle it. Economist Doug Harris talks about that a lot, and our system's not built to accommodate for enrollment shrinkage when we approve more schools that need to be open.
Right now, Orleans needs to take care of that budget shortfall because it really could impact a lot of kids.
Yeah, so there's a special council meeting on Tuesday, and I think we'll learn a lot more.
Okay, all righty. All right, time for other stories. Go around the table. E?
Next Saturday, February 15th, is the Parade of the Croix de Vue. A lot of people see that as the first kind of like real full-fledged parade, even though it's a smaller parade. After that, it's pretty much full throttle through Mardi Gras, which is March 4th. In time, it ends in time for St. Patrick's and St. Joseph parades.
Just no time to catch our breath.
Yeah.
It's been a
And
busy
so
year
we're
so
about
far.
to go on the real sleigh ride right here.
Okay, all righty. Okay,
Yeah, I would recommend everyone to take a look at a story our criminal justice reporter Nick Crastle uncovered with the Super Bowl coming to town. He found a presentation that was made to a committee to take a look through the lower Ninth Ward and uncover anything that could, quote, substantiate the Katrina narrative.
Okay.
And we wanted to tell the stories of local residents, not what the Super Bowl committee wanted people to see.
All right. Over to you,
Well,
John.
a few months ago, there was a controversy around the police chief, Ann Kirkpatrick, suspending promotions for major and captain, and it coming out that the mayor, Mayor Cantrell, had something to do, had some input into that decision. Well, a federal judge just this afternoon has ordered the city, or the NOPD, to abide by a certain list if they're going to promote the captain and major, and we'll see how that plays out. They're in this sustainment period. They're on the off-ramp from federal
For
oversight.
the federal degree, for consent decree. All righty, John. All right, guys, thanks so much for being here, and thank you all for joining us, too. And we'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.